Welcome, everyone, to the Heartbeat of Mother Earth Summit. I am your host, Jocelyn Mercado, and I'm very excited to welcome to the summit today, R Heartsong. Welcome very much, River. Thank you for being a part of the summit.
Thanks, Jocelyn. It's lovely to be invited to be a part of it.
R Heartsong is a healer who writes. For more than 2 decades, he has deeply studied and practiced bodywork and the healing arts, both as a therapist and an instructor, and also exploring creativity and the depths of the soul. He is the author of The Bones and Breath, A Man's Guide to Eros, the Sacred Masculine, and the Wild Soul, and he is the pen behind the Soul Artist Journal, celebrating a life for the senses. He teaches an embodied, sensual connection with life, nature, and the soul of the world. And so our topic today is embodying the sacred masculine, heart, soul, senses, and earth. And so I guess my first question to you, River, is that we hear so much about the sacred feminine these days. And so could you share with the audience what you mean by the concept of the sacred masculine, and how does that relate to the divine feminine?
There's a lot there. I guess first, it's been interesting having this book in the world and using the word or the words sacred masculine, because there's such an overlay already in Judeo-Christian cultures about that sacred masculine being the old man in the sky. And I want to be really clear that that's not what I'm talking about. And I think it's actually tremendously important to wrestle the idea of a sacred masculine away from religion, to open that wider. Sacred needn't mean religious. When I think about sacred, I'm thinking really something that invokes the heart and deep mystery. And certainly that's not the sole province of religion. So a sacred masculine, in my just general thinking about it, is heart-centered masculinity. And this wonderful resurgence of the divine feminine, which has really blossomed in the last couple of years, which is just, I find it incredibly heartening to see. And yet there's this aspect of almost, I don't want to say something missing, but if we go back to like Celtic mythology, the goddess always had a consort. And that consort was the Lord of the Wood, the stag. There's lots of different imagery for that. But in this resurgence of the divine feminine, my question is, where is her consort? Where is the other half of that equation? Not to get us specifically back into the duality of masculine or feminine, but where is the balance point to that? So that's, in my point of view, how it connects with the divine feminine. In a way, it's the consort, it's the other half, it's the balancing and upholding of that sacred feminine, and offering sort of the polarity in some ways, the yin or the yang, but really clearly that's not the old man in the sky.
Okay. Thank you. So are there any archetypes or particular qualities that you think kind of illustrate the sacred masculine?
I really, I like this energy of archetypes. I think, well, the first one that springs to my mind is the green man, which is, is a lovely old world energy. He's usually portrayed with a beard and hair of leaves. He's not always green. He's in imagery through cathedrals all through the old world, and he's been around since at least the medieval ages. And this deep imagery of a very masculine, bearded man of leaves and woods, who is really the keeper of the wood. To me, that is a beautiful sort of image and archetype that supports this idea of a sacred masculine, which is, as I said, heart-centered, but is also deeply interconnected. There are several sort of key characteristics that I think partly define the sacred masculine, and an interconnectedness with life is certainly one of them. And the green man really embodies that. It's just, And I think also this sort of our own green resurgence right now, the idea, the necessity of being more sustainable with life and interconnected, that there's a really potent modern interpretation for the green man surfacing, that he's, even his name is great, the green man. Green is where we need to be in terms of writing the new story that we're all a part of. So I think you could bring in lots of other archetypes in the sort of the mythopoetic men's movement of the 90s. There was a lot of popularity with king and warrior and lover, and all of these can be aspects of the sacred masculine, I think. But only if they're invoking the energy of the heart. That's to me the key element that makes an archetype something that illuminates the sacred masculine.
Mm-hmm. So I have read most of your book now, and I wanted to, share with everybody that I while it's written from certainly a masculine point of view, I think it holds very universal wisdom. I got so much out of it and felt, really, really deeply connected with what you've written there. And I know, as a woman, I feel that in our kind of mainstream modern society, it's very difficult for women to be able to fully open up to our passion and our dreams, and for men even more so, particularly when it comes to, for women, we're a little more kind of allowed to share emotions and, and passions and that kind of thing. So what do you advise for men, who are feeling stuck or who are feeling a bit trapped by this, the structures within which we live these days?
The one-dimensional model of masculinity that we're given. In working with men for 20 years, I think most men feel tremendously isolated in their own way. Mm-hmm. It is not encouraged, as we all know, to be able to connect in that heartfelt feeling way, and that is much more encouraged with the feminine among women. And so that in itself is its own bridge to cross. It's its own breaking out of the mold that I can share, I can feel, I can connect, and it doesn't make me less of a man. That's woven into that whole journey of what does it mean to be a man anyways, which in a society that really doesn't have any rites of passage anymore or initiations, men are sort of on their own. It's like you look around and the models that are given to us culturally are pretty vacuous. You're supposed to like sports or do these things. And it's about, these pretty flimsy one size fits all. And so inherently there's a bit of courage required to go looking for the deeper meaning of who am I and why am I here and what do I bring? And how does that relate to being a man? Do I fit with this societal model or not? I have a little more courage to break out and feel those feelings. I think there are a growing number of resources out. In my book, I called it a neo-men's movement, and maybe that's too strong because it's very fragmented, but there are a lot of men's groups. There are a lot of new warrior trainings. I mean, that's a brand name for somebody, but in that general feeling of places where men can connect, not beyond the therapy couch, which is a challenging enough place for most men to go anyways, to go and be vulnerable and be on that therapist couch. But I think of like the Minnesota Men's Conference, which Robert Bly started 30-something years ago, and the Redwood Men's Conferences. There are still and a growing number of these, and as I said, groups and organizations and websites offering their own form of initiation and connection that are really trying to break that mold of, traditional, limited, non-feeling, a pretty one-dimensional, what I would call an adolescent and even a pathological masculine, which we're seeing right now on a grand scale on even the presidential stage, but maybe we won't go there. that's the shadow masculine. Boy, let's keep to the sacred masculine. Mm.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, and I like how you mentioned in your book that a man can be soulful and still be strong, and that's something that's can be a little hard to grasp in our modern mainstream culture, but very, very so true. So true. And I think a lot of women are looking for that too, the man that is soulful and also strong, you know.
Well, I think men wrestle with what does it mean to be flexible. There's sometimes this notion of that surrender or yielding is weak. And we get really early on this message of, men should not be weak, boys don't cry, toughen up. And there's a confusion, I think, actually, about the difference between a surrender and flow and being weak. I think of water. I often say I've learned more from watching water flow in life than I learned anything in school. And I think, what in the world is more powerful than water? Nothing. And yet all it does is yield. It just flows. It goes around obstacles, and yet it can wear down a mountain. It's just this, it's a tremendous teacher that to be yielding is not necessarily to be weak, far from it. And to be yielding is essential in being relational. And that is one of those, back sort of that duality of our current cultural definitions of what is masculine or what is feminine. And naturally those have shifted through time, but that what we currently regard as the feminine is a much more receptive nature. It's much more welcoming of relationship and openness and inviting to that. And that in its nature is yielding, not weak, but receptive. And men get really tangled up around this, that if I'm yielding or receptive, that I'm weak. And yet receptivity is our senses. It's how all the information from nature and the world is coming to us. We have to be receptive if we want to feel that, to be open to that. And just this whole summit you're putting together about the heartbeat of Mother Earth, I'm sort of leaping ahead to another topic, but that comes to us, all those messages from nature or even our intuition, they come to us by being receptive. And that's that. There's an element there of surrender and openness. Go down that path, but I realized, okay, let's come back to what Jasmine was actually asking.
No, that's all right. That's all right. We can go to that path. So you also talk in your book about sacred ecology. So can you tell us how this all ties in? How does sacred masculine and sacred ecology tie in with the heartbeat of Mother Earth?
Yeah, I think, well, ecology, I think generally I use the word spiritual ecology, but same thing. Ecology we might define as the relationship of an organism with its environment or surroundings, as sort of a working definition for ecology. And when I talk about a spiritual ecology, it's definitely looping back to that heart-centered awareness, which is its own process in learning to cultivate as a man and be comfortable with. But this, one of the hallmarks of a sacred masculine is realizing the entitlement of everything to be here, that everything is interconnected, everything is relationship. That's sort of my mantra for life and living. Everything is relationship. And when you even begin to understand that, then your worldview shifts significantly. Because then there's this, if everything is connected and if everything is conscious, which it is, we live on a very biosentient planet, there's this, I call it the suprasomatic sentience. We are steeped in this living intelligence at all times. It permeates us all. We're inseparable from it. And a spiritual ecology is recognizing that. It's recognizing that interdependence. And so it goes beyond recognizing it. It also moves then towards stewardship. I talk about husbandry early in the book. In that, when I'm talking specifically about the sacred masculine and the idea of husbandry more as a wise steward or a caretaker of resources. And that is absolutely all of our role right now as we shift our relationship with the planet and Gaia. but particularly for men, that's that a spiritual ecology is moving into that place of stewardship because you know that it is you. You are it. It's inseparable. It's the web of life. So it's not just looking at how things are connected, but realizing that you are woven deeply into it and that your choices matter. So then this heartfelt connection becomes a real drive for life, for how you need to live in sort of with your own your own karma, your own, yeah, your own walk. Is that clear? Helpful?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You've spoken of the great work at hand at this time. Could you tell us a little more about what you mean by the great work?
I think the term the great work probably, I may be mistaken, but I think it arose with Thomas Berry. But interchangeable with that is we also hear the great turning, which Joanna Macy, Buddhist scholar, does remarkable work, particularly about our collective grief. The great turning is her, and I use those interchangeably in the work. The great turning, the great work. What that is shifting humanity from being the single most destructive force on the planet to being an interconnected and life-sustaining one, which is massive. It means reinventing pretty much everything. It's not just becoming green. It's looking at our institutions. It's looking at our education. It's looking at our government models. It's literally reinventing a more sustainable way of being, reflecting that deep interwovenness. And that's the great work. We have to make this shift. I mean, climate change is everywhere in our headlines. It's pretty, even though I think it's still very misunderstood, most people at this point are aware of it. So this realizing that the earth is changing, and so we need to make changes. It gets overwhelming for people. I think people want to put their head in the sand and say, well, you know, my choices don't matter. What can I do? You know, I recycle, you know, I buy a more fuel efficient car, but what else can I do? Our choices are definitely a part of that. I think our choices do matter. We can't change the world in the big scope, but we change our lives, and we change the people, we affect the people who are around us that we're in contact with. But also with that is, what do we bring? Each of us, this is also a really big part of my book, is that each of us has a very unique gift to bring to the world. And while our community has fragmented, you know, once upon a time, we would offer that gift to our community, and our communities were interwoven, you know, so-and-so is the best hunter and so-and-so is the best basket weaver. And we had unique gifts that we could contribute. And our sense of community is really nebulous at best, kind of broken, but that doesn't change that each of us still has a very unique gift to offer in some way and to this great work. And there are myriad, infinite ways that those gifts manifest. You know, I mean, some of us are writers or artists, and some of us are, you know, song carriers and, you know, storytellers, and some of us are raising conscious children, or we're founding green businesses, or we're forest activists, or there are infinite ways to do that. But part of that life walk, or our life task, if you will, is finding what is that soul gift, that soul talent that is mine to bring forward, to learn it, to own it, to be able to offer it without shame, without fear. This is what's mine to offer this. And in light to that great transpersonal work of, we have to shift our life on this planet.
Yeah.
That's the great work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's quite clear in your writing that great work can lead us to that fulfillment that we're looking for. You know, that's one way, one big way to find ourselves. You also talk about movement being a very important aspect of of kind of finding or feeling your, you know, feeling oneself, feeling one's soul. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I'll say that my background for 20 something years is as a body worker. So the the body itself, the body soul, I like to call it the body soul, because they're not separate, is terra firma for me. That's sort of where everything comes back to, the body. And most of us are pretty, particularly men, we tend to live from like here up. You know, we live in a very disembodied culture, a very mental culture up in our heads. And we use this body to carry us around, and we occasionally notice when it hurts or it's not feeling well, but most of the time we're just spinning, spinning, spinning up here. And because we've become now so glued to our phones and devices, and again, we're becoming more and more disembodied. I mean, obviously you're always embodied in your bones, but being aware of that and learning to be consciously embodied, to be in your breath, in movement, in your skin, is its own journey. I do think that, well, I know that our patterns and our habits are not just in our head, they're all in our body. So when we're trying to make some change in our life, whether that's something we're doing or in our relationship, that it's not merely thinking our way to new behavior. It's really, we need to shift what's wired in our body. And movement is a tremendous healer. I mean, I tend to think that the antidote to everything is moving. Get moving. I talk about inertia. In fact, there are 7 soul skills that are outlined in this book, and each one has an embodiment exercise with it. The soul skills they apply to men and women, and they're really practical tools for this talk about soul, living a more soulful and embodied life. And the soul skill number 1 is getting out of it, rouse from inertia. And it's really about movement. And there's an embodiment exercise later in the book, which is really just about dancing, just to come into your body, to start moving. Because when we shift the patterns, when we begin to explore them, begin to feel them, then we can shift them. My mom was a therapist, and she used to say, people can talk about their issues till the cows come home, but if you don't address the body, nothing's really going to change. And she was a Jungian. I was like, wow, you're really ahead of the game there. But moving it, and movement gurus like Gabrielle Roth and her 5 rhythms, and the ecstatic dance that's sort of popping up in cities all over the country, places where you can go and move in a communal aspect. Those are great. It's very freeing. It's not necessarily therapy, but movement can be therapy at home, putting on some music and just letting your body move and exploring those places that are held, and beginning to sort of unfreeze them as I follow my own shoulder here. Like, that's a chronic place for me. It's like, or when we're frozen, or we're in feeling reluctant, or maybe like back to the soul gifts, there's this time where we feel we need to bring something forth. But if we are nervous or unsure with that, pretty good bet that our breath is constricted, our body is held. And one of the ways we can start that shift is, let's shift the body first. So breath, opening, allowing some movement and breath to move through the body. Already we're allowing ourselves to become more expansive. The soul is expansive. The soul wants to be connected with this more than human world. The soul wants to be in communion with the larger story. So our natural state is to be expansive and open and connected. But we get all these patterns and laid on protections and persona that tend to make us more contained. And most people spend a good part of their life, maybe their whole life, in a sort of protective containment. And so movement can literally help us shift that and become more expansive. Yeah. The body is a healer. The body doesn't lie, and the body is a tremendous healer.
Yeah. I love how you said that animals, humans are the only animal that kind of constricts the way we move, and just because of our thinking mind and our, concern about what others might think of us. But animals just do what they do. It is what it is, and they're not.
They only know authentic movement.
Yeah.
We're the only creature that's lost track with authentic movement,
Mhm.
so that's, yes, we've got this overlay onto it. So, and removing the overlay could be a mental process, but we can also just learn to move. Yeah, learning to move, following um, the sequence of movement that wants to happen. And that it gets complicated with trauma. I used to work years with trauma therapies, things like Hakome integrative somatics, which later became sensory motor psychotherapy, and working with the effects of trauma. And that definitely truncates us. And again, most animals can work through that naturally. The natural system of discharge, there's an unfreezing that happens, and they move through their trauma much more quickly. We, because of our thinking and our mental and all these other patterns that we put over that, that unfreezing doesn't happen. Um, it, not that's essentially what PTSD is. It's a frozen response in the body. And then you add to that we live in this sort of constant fight or flight, high stress response. Our society, our modern society, is very stressful. We don't. It's not like once upon a time where there was a fight or flight response because we saw the grizzly bear or the saber-toothed tiger. There was a mobilization. We would run to get away or fight. And in that, it's discharged.
Mhm.
Whereas now our stresses are bills and car payments and all these other, the deep grief of the world and these other things that, how do you discharge that? How does that sequence through your body?
Yeah.
Very difficult. And so most of us live in this sort of low state or even high state of stress arousal at all times. And it wears down our adrenals, it wears down our health, and it's movement can be a really powerful element for that, and getting back to authentic movement,
Mhm.
which is a whole nother hour conversation. So
Yeah.
we'll loop back to the middle, but yes, humans. We've lost our authentic movement. I'll add one more thing to that. Is part of that is, I think we are so disconnected from nature now. We're so disconnected that we've lost the wild soul. We tend to think of nature as being out there, but we are nature. We just don't perceive it anymore the way, because we're not immersed in the living world. We're immersed in this sort of constructed world, and we're not hunting for our food. Most of us, there's all this many layered disconnection from nature, and that also contributes to our sort of the loss of the wild soul, that part that's more connected to nature, that is open through senses, that feels like, oh, this is a relationship, this is a symbiotic relationship here. There's something very important that's happening because I am that, and that is me.
So what recommendations would you have for people who are looking to reconnect with nature and who have maybe struggled with taking that step?
Well, I think there's probably a whole spectrum, right? Reconnecting with nature can be as simple as sitting with a pot of flowers on your fire escape and, just really appreciating the beauty of that. Georgia O'Keeffe, the famous, modernist painter, she used to say that people, they don't take the time to see. Part of the reason that she painted her flowers and everything was so big, she said, because people don't really see it. They don't take the time. Taking time. She's quoted about something like, it takes time to see, like, having a friend takes time.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be very simple elements of pausing. That's the first step, though. We have to pause, right? We have to make space for it. We have to, like, oh, right, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to disconnect from these 10,000 other demands and daily drama. And whether that's, a breath for meditation or a breath to connect with some element of nature, there's a sensory exchange that happens. And so that could be very simple, like walking through the park. That could be an afternoon just sitting outside in your backyard. That is nature in its own way. It doesn't have to be that you go and spend a week-long vision quest. Now, that would be, further along the spectrum, where you're literally putting yourself into nature, which for most people is a little threatening. We perceive nature as wild. We're shown that it's wild. It's dangerous, life-threatening. It's not a place most of us, if we haven't grown up into it, are not innately comfortable. Spending a night in a forest is definitely going to bring most people face to face with a lot of fears. But there are, I think I know nature is probably our greatest teacher. It models so many things. It models, everywhere you look at nature, it models interconnectedness, and that nothing is separate, and that everything is indebted. And so the more that we can immerse ourselves in what I would call wild or semi-wild nature, the more we get a chance to see that, the more we start to feel comfortable there, the more some ancient part of ourself awakens and remembers and says, yeah, some part of this is me, or I feel really good here, or I feel peaceful here. Putting yourself in a situation where your experience is positive, that's obviously going to help, as opposed to, going on a, Arctic expedition where you're cold, or you're really feeling you're battling nature. That's probably not going to bring you closer to that, affinity. But so creating situations that feel nourishing, that enable you to open. Again, when we're open, there's a soul activation happening. There's a connection then with this much, much larger story that we're immersed in. And whenever we come into the body, whether it's the movement piece or not, being mindful, just breath, opening our senses, we start to engage in a communion. And that's, for me, the heart of nature is this communion, that the more than human world, or the other than human world, that we're inseparable from. Even if it seems I live in a city and nature's way out there, nature is microbes. Nature is the cells in your body. Nature is inseparable from you. The more you can begin to sort of dilate your senses and begin to, comes back in a way to that, what I was saying about men, and learning to be receptive, learning to be open, to feel the touch of the world on you. And you realize, oh, there's potentially a dialogue here. Potentially.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. As a woman, I feel like many of the, because of course, as individuals, male or female, we all possess some of the sacred masculine, some of the sacred feminine, but I feel like as a woman, I've been encouraged to take on maybe some of the shadow aspects of the masculine, as far as, pushing too hard, trying so hard for success at the, risk of other things like being soulful. Many of us in careers, especially in the corporate world as women, we kind of take on those negative masculine aspects. So what would you, how would you say that women can, better embody the positive, the sacred masculine in our lives, and why is that relevant and important right now?
Well, as you said, we do have both within us. As a man, I certainly have what we would call feminine qualities within me, and I feel a deep affinity for the divine feminine. So yes, as women, you could say, well, yes, that those what we call masculine traits are within us as well, or within women as well. And I like your distinction there, that maybe those were shadow masculine states, or that, because whether it's masculine or feminine, there's certainly a shadow side and or a less skillful side, or we might even call it a one-dimensional or pathological or undeveloped side. Mm-hmm. Because so much of what we see of the masculine in our culture is an undeveloped, one-sided, adolescent, pathological masculine. There's this notion women's like, well, that's what I need to embody to get ahead, because that's what's being modeled to me. What I would offer is that is not necessarily the masculine. I mean, it is that an undeveloped masculine. Because the sacred masculine is really, well, first, it's always an appropriate use of personal power. the appropriate and effective use of personal power. That's always a characteristic of the sacred masculine. So never using our power to get ahead or to put someone else at a disadvantage or for injurious pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's, as I said earlier, always a heart-centered masculine. So even if we completely just let go of notions of what's masculine or what's feminine, that women, when we are, if you're embracing that element of the heart, that is, it's non-dual. You know, it's the soul.
Yeah.
And the heart, to me, are both non-dual. The soul is beyond gender, the heart is beyond gender, and that is this place where really we need to shine our light. That's where we're coming from. And then we're sort of really transcending matters of what's the divine feminine or what's the sacred masculine. It's just about coming back to the heart. And that when we're operating from the heart, then there's a whole different sense of what's the right use of power. And that this element of being able to be expansive and receptive, I often think of this like a figure eight. You know, it's like we loop out to the world and we come back in, we loop out, or even the higher centers of us and our lower centers in this, but the heart is always this center point and coming back to that. So I'm not sure that I really nailed your question there about how women could embody the sacred masculine, but I think the thread that lights up for me there is that it's still really, it's just about the heart. It is about the heart. And that women, as much as men, can be strong and in the heart and coming from that place.
Yeah.
And then they are the sacred masculine and the divine feminine.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. One other question that I wanted to ask you is where we are getting near the end of the interview time. You talk in your book about the force of Eros and, as the kind of the magnetic or attractive force that exists in the universe. And I found that very powerful and also especially as related to, the heartbeat of Mother Earth and why we're all here and kind of the forces that formed the cosmos and formed the universe and formed us all. Could you talk a little bit about why that's important in your, in your perspective and your, in your book as you describe it?
Eros, the way I talk about it is, this very cosmic force. I mean, there's this, Greek mythology history for Eros as a god, but I talk about it, as you said, in this form of allurement or an energetic attraction, or Jungians talk about it as the life force, this desire to connect.
Mm-hmm.
The cosmologist Brian Swim talks a lot about allurement, and that allurement is the strongest force in the universe. Allurement holds electrons and atoms together. It holds solar systems together. It holds everything together. And I actually think that Eros and nature and the soul are very entwined. That Eros, as this allurement, is part of how our soul finds its way through life. The allurement, following our allurement, is very important. It's this mysterious process of what we're drawn to with dreams and things that were important to us in our childhood. And so this learning to, yes, heed and follow allurement is part of the soul's own process. But that in that we're open, we're engaging. Again, we're in an expansive mode. When Eros, when we're being allured to something or we're following that, there is this natural openness to connect with it. And then we're in a relational piece. And with nature, or the heartbeat of Mother Earth, I think like nature is so beautiful in most of its forms, and it's so alluring for us. There's this natural form of Eros that's drawing us to wild places or beautiful places, then where we are feeling very open and connected. And things that we find beautiful, we want to protect. So there's this like all this sort of goodness that starts to come out of being drawn and allured to nature and to earth. I actually think it's kind of her master plan. It's the way she's dreaming us awake. I deeply believe Earth is a very sentient being, that she is dreaming through us, that part of our whole soul's gift is what Earth is dreaming through us, and that happens for people in particular places. It's part of why people are drawn to places where they feel really connected, and that I think also there are very powerful places on the Earth where Earth is really dreaming people awake.
Mm.
So, and it's often our allurement that draws us there. Like, I don't know why I need to go to this place and check it out, but I do. I've had this just, and so that is, in a way, that's in a very real way, that's eros. That's our longing and our allurement. And it's drawing us to places and events in life then where something is awakening us. And those are all clues, these things that are awakening. How do these all fit together in terms of what is my gift to offer? What I'm here to bring at this time, at this tremendous, challenging, evocative time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, as you know, that's a big chapter in the book about eros and allurement and following that, how that connects with soul. But and it's also really deeply connected with nature for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close, do you have any new projects or new endeavors that you would want to share with the audience that's listening?
Well, for almost 5 years, I wrote a blog called the Soul Artist Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And recently I closed the cover on that. I'm starting a new website, a new blog called Tending Sacred, which is tendingsacred.com is where you can find that. It's just started, which is really more about the healer's journey, going deeper into the healer's journey. And I have a new book that I'm trying to find a home for. So that's an ongoing search with agents and publishers. And yeah, so a book in the works, a book that's done, trying to find its home and publisher, and turning towards tending sacred and going deeper into the healer's journey.
Okay. Wonderful. And I do want to share with everybody that's listening that River is offering a very generous free gift. So his book that we've talked a lot about during this interview, The Bones and Breath, A Man's Guide to Eros, the Sacred Masculine and the Wild Soul. And there it is. So he is offering to give away 10 copies to individuals who will be selected at random, if you go ahead and enter the drawing. So the instructions for how to do that are just below this interview. You can go to www.soulquest.com and fill out the contact form there, but I will include that link right below this interview, so it's very easy to access. So anyone who's interested, I encourage you to go out and enter that drawing. And so, yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for offering that, River.
It's too late.
And for those who don't win the drawing, definitely go out and buy the book because it's worth it.
Great pitch. Thank you. Lovely endorsement.
All true. So, well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really wonderful sharing with you.
Thank you for inviting me, Jocelyn. Really nice to connect. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.